In 1704, if you wanted to be considered like the ideal woman,
Yeah.
having impeccable manners just wasn't enough.
No, not at all.
You also needed to know how to manufacture artificial pearls, whiten ivory, and basically dabble in literal alchemy.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds totally absurd to our modern ears, right? But the pressure to constantly better ourselves, to fit this highly specific, idealized mold, it isn't a modern invention born in the internet era. It's a centuries-old obsession.
Which completely shatters the assumption I think a lot of us have. Like, we picture our ancestors just churning butter and trying to survive the winter.
Right, just getting by.
Exactly. But today, we're taking a deep dive into a stack of 3 historical instruction manuals spanning just over a century. And we have, we have the Accomplished Female Instructor from 1704, the Female Instructor from 1821, and the Gentleman and Ladies Book of Politeness from 1833.
It's quite a lineup.
It really is. So, our mission today for this deep dive is to track the evolution of societal expectations. We are looking at the actual rule books people were supposed to follow to be considered, successful, upstanding citizens.
And these texts are invaluable because they operate as cultural blueprints. They don't just give us a dry list of chores or etiquette rules.
Yeah.
They provide this sort of X-ray of what society valued most at those specific moments. You can trace the shifting anxieties, the economic changes, and the completely changing definitions of what it meant to be a valuable human being.
So let's start right at the beginning of that timeline back in the early 18th century.
Yeah.
We're looking at the Accomplished Female Instructor from 1704, written by an author simply known as R.G.,
Yes.
and the book is split into 2 distinct parts, and the contrast between them is just jarring. So part I focuses on what the author calls generous breeding. But wait, before we go further, when they say generous breeding, they don't mean genetics or reproduction, right?
No.
No,
Yeah.
they mean aristocratic etiquette.
Correct. Breeding in this context refers entirely to your social upbringing, your manners, and your ability to navigate the upper echelons of society gracefully. It's about being a charming presence.
Okay, right, because the text emphasizes the art of speaking well and maintaining witty raillery to gain esteem in conversation. That part makes sense to me. It sounds like standard high society networking.
Sure.
But then you hit part 2 of this book, and it's essentially a laboratory manual.
It really is. It pivots entirely from social grace to physical chemistry.
It teaches women how to make curious confectionaries, cordial waters, and those artificial pearls I mentioned at the top of the sheet.
Yes, the pearls.
And it gives instructions on waxworks, rockwork, and how to dye curious colors. So my immediate thought reading this was that this woman isn't just a homemaker. She is essentially the household's chief entertainment officer and resident chemist.
Exactly.
But how does witty banter and the ability to manufacture fake pearls exist in the exact same job description?
Well, to understand the mechanism behind this, we have to look at what the home actually was in 1704. Before the Industrial Revolution fully took hold, the home wasn't this refuge you retreated to after a long day at the office.
Right, there was no office.
Exactly. The home was the primary site of production. But for the upper and middling classes, it was also supposed to be a site of wonder.
Yeah, and the word curious is used repeatedly in those recipes. Curious confectionaries, curious colors. What did that word actually signal to a reader in 1704?
In the context of the early Enlightenment, curious didn't just mean inquisitive, like how we use it today. It meant something that required intense skill, precision, and scientific intrigue to produce.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, scientific curiosity and the ornamental arts were deeply blended. By mastering these curious crafts, a woman was demonstrating her family's wealth and sophistication. Her value was rooted in her ability to physically master the natural world, to delight her guests.
So making artificial pearls wasn't some rainy day craft project. It was a flex.
It was absolutely a flex.
You were proving you understood the material world. It's a very performance-based kind of value, entirely rooted in physical creation and external charm.
Precisely. Knowledge was a practical tool. It was used to curate an environment that was physically beautiful and intellectually stimulating, but as you noticed in the sources, that expectation doesn't last.
It certainly doesn't, because if 1704 was about turning the home into a laboratory of wonders, 1821 completely strips that away. The external parlor tricks just vanish, and suddenly the home becomes a fortress.
It's a total fortress.
We jump to a book with a very similar title, The Female Instructor, but the expectation has completely flipped.
Yeah, the definition of a person's worth moves entirely inward. We shift from the hands and outer charm to the administrative brain and the immortal soul.
And you can see that shift just by reading the subtitle of the 1821 manual. It's now a guide to being a useful member of society, a pleasing companion, or a respectable mother of a family. But when you get to the back half of the 1821 book, I mean specifically pages 400 through 582, it is just this dense implementation of a complete domestic economy.
Oh, it is incredibly comprehensive.
Yeah, it lists out a select system of cookery, the art of preserving and pickling, brewing, making wines, family recipes, the management of poultry, dyeing, and medical recipes. And the part that stood out to me was the focus on giving directions to servants of every description.
Yes, that's a crucial detail.
Because this sounds less like a charming alchemist and way more like a corporate CEO managing a complex supply chain.
Well, it really highlights the transition of the housewife into a true domestic administrator. And it's fascinating because it draws this very stark parallel to older texts like La Maison Réglée from 1700.
Oh, wait, the French manual.
Yes.
Yeah.
In La Maison Réglée, you had this highly systematized top-down management of a complete domestic economy. But in 1700, that was framed around aristocratic male-led management. The master of the house was directing a vast staff. But by 1821, in the Female Instructor, that exact same level of rigorous administrative control has been democratized and shifted entirely onto the middle-class housewife.
Wow, so she's the one running the system now.
Exactly. Which points directly to the macroeconomic shift happening in the background. The Industrial Revolution had arrived.
Right.
Factories were pulling labor and physical production out of the house, so the home was left relatively empty of its original purpose. It needed a new brand, basically, a new reason to exist.
And so society rebranded the home as a moral sanctuary?
Yes, a sanctuary to escape the brutal, smog-filled capitalist world outside. The housewife is no longer an ornamental alchemist. She is a domestic administrator.
That CEO analogy really holds up when you look at the phrase directions to servants. She isn't necessarily making the wine or plucking the poultry herself. She is delegating. She's managing a staff. But I'll play devil's advocate here. Is this heavy emphasis on being a respectable mother and a domestic administrator, is it just a new way to keep women confined to the house now that they aren't strictly needed for physical production?
I mean, that is the core tension of the era. The physical labor was outsourced, so the intellectual and moral labor was drastically scaled up to fill the void. The home became an administrative unit.
Yeah.
And the woman at the center of it was expected to manage both the physical economy of the house, all that pickling and brewing on pages 400 to 582, and the spiritual economy of everyone inside it.
And the spiritual economy in this 1821 text is fiercely rigorous. The book dives incredibly deep into the religious instruction of children, and it treats it with the seriousness of a university curriculum.
The methodology is highly systematized. The text explicitly warns against teaching religion in a random, desultory way.
Yeah, I actually had to look up desultory while reading this. It means lacking a plan, purpose, or enthusiasm, just kind of going through the motions.
Right. The manual argues you cannot use scraps and remnants of time for moral instruction. It insists this must be done in the morning, when the intellect is clear and the spirit's light.
Wow.
It even co-opts Shakespeare, encouraging mothers to find tongues in trees, books in running brooks, sermons in stones.
Imagine trying to raise your kids today with that 1821 mindset. You couldn't just squeeze in a quick bedtime story or a chat in the car. You'd be expected to use the morning walk to the bus stop as a rigorous theological seminar.
It's exhausting just thinking about it.
It really is. And they draw an uncompromising line between true practical religion and mere worldly morality.
Because in 1821, the motive was everything. It wasn't enough to just perform a good deed. If your internal reasoning wasn't pure, the deed was worthless.
They use this brilliant analogy of the counterfeit coin. The book compares good qualities that lack pure motives to a fake coin. It might look like sterling gold, and it might even pass current in the traffic of the everyday world, but when it's finally brought to the touchstone, it fails the test.
It highlights a society deeply concerned with internal authenticity. It's an analytical approach to the soul. You see this in how the book breaks down the act of prayer into rigid, distinct categories.
Oh, right, the list.
Yeah, adoration, self-dedication, confession, petition, thanksgiving, intercession. You are managing your spiritual portfolio with the exact same administrative rigor you apply to the household's poultry and brewing.
And the historical role models they provide for women completely changed, too. They don't talk about women who were charming conversationalists.
Not at all.
They talk about Lady Jane Grey, the Tudor noblewoman, who famously chose to stay inside and read Plato in Greek rather than go out hunting with her family.
Yes.
They bring up Mary, Queen of Great Britain, and praise her for using solid reasoning at the age of 16 to reject her father's attempts to convert her to Catholicism. They are praising these women for being fiercely intellectual and morally unshakable.
The contrast with 1704 is total. You've gone from external mastery of the physical world to internal mastery of the soul. You are the moral anchor.
But that internal focus doesn't last either.
No, it swings back around.
By the time we hit our third source, we are pivoting back outward, but in a way that feels incredibly tense. We move to 1833, and we are looking at the Gentleman and Lady's Book of Politeness. And if 1821 was about building a fortress for the soul, 1833 reads like an incredibly detailed terms of service agreement for stepping outside that fortress.
It is the ultimate manual for external social performance. As the 19th century progressed, society grew infinitely more complex. People clearly felt the need for a codified system to navigate public life.
And the granularity of the rules in this book is almost terrifying. It dictates propriety in literally everything.
Everything.
It covers propriety in religious duties, conjugal duties, which, by the way, must have been an awkward chapter to read in what it calls the toilet, meaning your grooming and dressing habits. But what really caught my attention was how it breaks down micro-interactions based on the specific profession of the person you're talking to.
Yes, the specific protocols for different classes of people.
It gives you different rules for how to interact with shopkeepers versus lawyers versus physicians versus artists versus military men.
It's extremely specific.
It seems to me that if you need a specific written rule book for talking to an artist versus a lawyer, you are dealing with a society that is terrified of accidentally disrespecting the wrong person. Was this just driven by pure social anxiety?
Social anxiety and unprecedented demographic shifts. We have to consider the psychological friction caused by urbanization.
Okay.
By 1833, cities were expanding rapidly and the middle class was exploding. For the first time, a massive portion of the population was no longer living in small agrarian villages where everyone knew your family, your background, and your exact social standing.
You were suddenly surrounded by strangers.
Completely.
You had no idea if the person next to you was a newly wealthy merchant, a struggling aristocrat, or a con artist.
Exactly. And interacting with a crowded world of strangers creates immense friction. This 1833 book provides the armor of etiquette to protect you in that environment.
Armor. I like that.
When you don't know who someone is, you rely on a highly codified system of manners to signal your own respectability and to gauge theirs. It's a defensive mechanism.
That makes the way they categorize human behavior makes so much sense. The book divides your public actions into two main buckets: physical proprieties and moral observances. Under physical proprieties, it regulates the carriage of your body, your gestures, your pronunciation. But the one that really got me was that it lists the talent of listening as a physical propriety.
Which is a very shrewd observation by the author.
Yeah.
It acknowledges that active listening isn't just an internal state of paying attention. It is a physical performance you put on for the benefit of the speaker to signal your adherence to social norms.
Then you get to the moral observances, and it goes from defensive to downright restrictive. It lists rules for avoiding vulgar usages, but then it actually dictates the rules of narrations and digressions.
That's wild.
It tells you exactly how and when you are allowed to use pleasantry, puns, and bombos. It feels like they were trying to engineer all the spontaneity right out of human interaction.
Because spontaneity is risky in a society built on fragile, new social hierarchies. Think about how different this is from the 1704 manual.
Oh, right.
The 1704 text encouraged playful, creative, witty raillery. It wanted you to be dazzling. But this 1833 politeness is a highly regulated, defensive kind of etiquette. It's designed to help you navigate complex social ladders safely without causing offense or embarrassing yourself. It is essentially risk management for conversation.
Risk management for conversation.
Yeah.
That perfectly encapsulates it. When you lay all three of these sources out, the trajectory of what society demanded from a person is astonishing.
It really is a journey.
We started in 1704 with the curious ornamental alchemist, expected to master the natural world and entertain her guests with physical marvels. Then, as the Industrial Revolution emptied the home of physical production, we shifted to 1821.
As administrator.
Right. The ideal became the rigorously intellectual domestic administrator, running her home like a moral corporation, echoing that aristocratic structure of la maison réglée, but for the middle class and guarding against counterfeit virtue. Finally, as cities swelled with strangers, we landed in 1833 with the hyper-regulated social performer. using a rigid rule book of politeness as a shield to survive the public sphere.
And when you look at that centuries-long trajectory, the most compelling takeaway is that the underlying impulse hasn't gone anywhere. We might laugh at the idea of whitening ivory or needing a strict protocol to speak to a shopkeeper, but the core behavior is identical to what we do today.
We are still constantly trying to hack our way into becoming the ideal person.
Exactly. If you scroll through productivity blogs teaching you how to optimize your morning routine, or watch videos on how to curate the perfect aesthetic for your home, or read articles on corporate networking and personal branding, you are participating in this exact same historical quest.
Yeah, that's so true.
The only thing that changes is the specific flavor of what society demands of us, whether that is physical resourcefulness, spiritual purity, or social risk management.
We just traded the Gentleman and Ladies Book of Politeness for the LinkedIn algorithm.
We really did.
It really makes you evaluate the cultural footprints we are actively leaving behind right now. Which brings me to a final thought for you to ponder, long after this deep dive is over. Imagine a historian, exactly 200 years from now, stumbling across a digital archive of your life.
Oh, wow.
If they found a stack of your internet search history, your saved articles, the influencers you follow, and the podcasts you listen to, well, what would they think the strict rule book for a successful life was in our era? And more importantly, when they look back at our metaphorical instruction manuals, how exhausting will they think our daily lives really were?